we wait a little longer because there's now 20 answers. There should be some more. So there's also still a lot of people not taking courses. Okay, given the time, I would suggest to move on to the next question. But this will already also give our experts a little bit of insight in what kind of experience they have in the audience. The next questions. How satisfied are you with the quality of the e-courses you are following? And of course, we are relating this question back to the first question. But there are quite some people unsatisfied that are taking e-courses now because of Corona. Okay, and then let's move on to the last question. So we will have enough time for the discussion and the expert presentations. How satisfied are you with the options to give feedback about the quality of an e-learning course? And here we see more or less the same picture as in the previous question. Very interesting. Thank you for your answers to these short questions. And now let's move on to our first expert presentation. The first expert we invited today is Maria Kelo. She's the director of ENCA, and she, of course, knows everything from the European perspective on quality assurance, and will tell us about what they know when it comes to e-learning.
Okay, thank you very much. You can move directly to the next one. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you. And as we've just seen the outcomes of the Mentimeter, I think it's very interesting to note that the biggest dissatisfaction is with the emergency measures, so COVID caused online provision. So I'll get back to that point in a moment. But we have heard a lot of discussions at the European level about online education, especially maybe a few years back, worries about can e-learning really be equivalent to face-to-face? Is it as good as, etc. So I think the key point here from my perspective is that e-learning will be different from education mainly provided face-to-face, but it should indeed be equal in the terms of achievement of the learning outcomes, the kind of quality of the student experience, while it might not be exactly the same. So it all comes really back down to the learning outcomes. And so, sorry, this image somehow doesn't work, but it should say learning comes first and then technology is in the second phase. So first we have to think really about what we want to provide in terms of learning. And then technology is like, it's a tool. In the next slide, I look a little bit, the next one, please. So the European Framework for Quality Assurance. We have a common framework in Europe provided by the European Standards and Guidelines. The real name is Standards and Guidelines for Quality Assurance in the European Higher Education Area. And the document and the standards contained in this document are to give guidance, and they cover all the areas that we consider are vital for successful provision and learning environments in higher education. And they contain standards both for internal quality assurance and external quality assurance. But what's really interesting is that they really apply to all education by all providers in all the European higher education area countries. But of course, in order for them to apply, they have to be kind of the baseline, the common, have a kind of a basic standards. So they also have to be very generic principles. They need to be translated into the different contexts. And of course, then the question for us is how to operationalize really the ESG into usable and useful practical criteria for e-learning, and what do we have to take into account when we do that? And that is why, and in the next slide, please, you see just a link to a publication produced by ENQA 2 years ago, where a working group of ENQA looked into the standards of the ESG and considered what are the specific quality concerns that might come up for e-learning and how to address or how to translate the ESG into practical standards in that respect. So in the next slide, you see that there are 10 standards in the part 1. So it's quite a few. So unfortunately, in 7-8 minutes, I cannot go through all of them, but you're welcome to have a look at the report if that's interesting for you. So I will just mention a few things related to 2 of the standards, which I think might be very interesting for you. One is on student-centered learning, teaching and assessment, and the other one is on learning resources and student support. So in the next slide, I looked at the standard 1.3, on which reads that institutions should ensure that the programs are delivered in a way that encourages students to take an active role in creating the learning process, and that the assessment of students reflects this approach. It's quite a big requirement, but as you can see, that could be very easily be applied to online learning as well as face-to-face learning. But in online learning, there might be different quality concerns or challenges to overcome. And one is indeed this active role in the learning process. So our recommendations to institutions in this respect are the following. One is in order to overcome the potential lack of interaction, to create very good tools for online engagement, and in particular make sure that there is a good monitoring of those tools. So for example, expert monitored discussion groups or teacher monitored discussion groups, or why not student, but so that it's really done in a proper way. And of course, institutions are invited to reflect on the most appropriate pedagogical model and how to integrate that pedagogical model into the e-learning mode so that all the intended learning outcomes can be achieved. So learning comes first, technology comes second, and we have to reflect through what kind of tools can we implement the pedagogical model best, or which ones cannot really be used in e-learning mode. And of course, teachers, we cannot expect everybody is already trained and know how to do this. It's not very easy. So we have to be sure that teachers, but also technical staff, are trained so that they are able to provide content and assignments in the e-learning platforms so that students can really reach the learning outcomes. And of course, we need appropriate assessment methods and technologically sound assessment tools. And you might be interested to have a look at a project called Tesla. And Nina mentioned that at the beginning. There was intervention from that project in the previous webinar. So that was really to create, let's say, a foolproof online assessment tool, which will be open source and available for any institutions who wants to use that, but unfortunately only at the end of this year. In the next slide, I look a little bit at the standard 1.6, which regards to student support. So institutions should ensure that adequate and readily accessible learning resources and student support are provided. And this is important for all students, but in e-learning, we believe that there is a possibility, quite likely possibility, that the learner profiles might be more diverse than in face-to-face education. So the institution should not only be aware of that diversity, but to also really analyze the profiles, so that they can really provide the appropriate and well thought through support systems. And also be sure that they are careful that not all of their e-learning provision collect a similar type of group of learners. And therefore there might be a different need for each program even. We also recommend that the learning analytics be used in a wise way to inform, for example, about the students' needs. But of course, also something Nina mentioned, we have to be sure that at the same time, the data protection is of course taken care of very scrupulously. Access to library resources and labs will be also needed to be considered in a particular way, because it's not a building that you necessarily go to. but there has to be a different way of access to information and resources. And technologically sound virtual learning environments, so that at least there are no hiccups in the technical side. And we also think that there might need to be closer follow-up of students, also at a personal level, in order to ensure retention and completion, because especially in some type of e-learning, we see that the dropouts are relatively higher than in a more traditional form of education. And then the next slide. This is really my final words for my final minute, is the considerations in times of COVID-19. What I would like to say, and Nina also mentioned, this is a very special time. Rome was not built in a day, and institutions that have really taken e-learning as their strategic priority have worked on that for years, developing and investing a lot of resources to develop e-learning programs. Now, what we've seen this spring is that institutions have had to, from one day to another, to go online. So the COVID-19 adjustments are not really necessarily real e-learning. They are kind of a better than nothing solution, firefighting. So we have to also be aware that there is a difference between what institutions can do suddenly and what then, however, they have to really pay attention to if that is to become a permanent feature. So at this point, I think the most important is for us all to kind of maintain trust in the institutions and their interest in providing good quality education, and give space and time to institutions to really deal with this situation. There is a huge extra workload. And quality assurance agencies, for example, are now all over Europe, leaving the institution a little bit freer and rather focus on providing support, possibilities to share experiences, and show flexibility in the kind of quality checks so that institutions can focus on what matters most. Of course, we have to be really careful that in the second phase, we analyze what is happening and what has happened, and to monitor. And that if that becomes a permanent solution for some cases, that it really enters and is integrated in the quality assurance system as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maria, for this first insights. After this thank you slides, it's time to move on already to the second expert presentation, which is from Ignas. Ignas is he is studying in the Vilnius University. He is part of our QA expert pool and also involved in multiple student organizations in his university. And he will tell all about his expertise in this field. So I will give him the floor.
Thank you, Nina, and good afternoon to everyone. It is a pleasure to be here and to give you this presentation with some of my insights in regards to e-learning. So maybe I will skip just this presentation. So next slide, because Nina already done that. Next slide. Okay, thanks. So interesting thing, but a lot of ideas that already Maria talked about are really in my presentation as well. What I want to say, that it is rather important to understand that e-learning is learning despite the methods and tools used, since our brains have to work no matter what the tools are being used, and we still have to acquire competences and gain certain skills in order to perform some activities. So it is also really important to understand that e-learning does provide with a lot of new ways and opportunities to facilitate our acquisition of knowledge, acquisition of competences, and how we think, and to develop our skills. So among those are individualization, which is of much higher degree, the flexibility, internalization, and things like that. However, just as Maria mentioned, we have to separate two things. So this learning, which is done during the crisis of COVID-19, shouldn't be considered e-learning. It is more like for teachers, it's trying to teach online from home during crisis. For students, it's like trying to learn from home during a crisis. So the aspects which I will be covering here today, so will not also be in regards to this learning which is due to COVID crisis. And also in majority cases, e-learning is is not present in these institutions, and institutions are at a very different stage of developing this e-learning. So also what you have to take into account, and this is one of the difficulties of giving this presentation, that e-learning is in such a different state across the European higher education area. Next, please. So in regard, as I mentioned, so learning is still learning. It doesn't matter what tools are used. So and the quality assurance in that sense should be also rather similar as in the traditional face-to-face learning, with only some minor considerations maybe for the technical aspects, how the technically with technology should be particular issues should be solved. However, the one thing I want to stress, but it is really important to facilitate communication between students, teachers, and all the stakeholders inside the institution, because there is in e-learning, if it is an online program and not only just one e-learning course, there is no possibility to have a real life chats and real life discussions and to meet together to talk about. So the special attention, in my opinion, should be given to facilitating discussion and open, transparent, and clear feedback during this e-learning study process, because it is very easy for students and to get how to say distanced themselves from the learning, because it's so hard to turn on the microphone to say something in regards to quality, to give some certain feedback to a teacher, because you just become at the center of attention, and you have to speak and you have to say something really relevant. So it is the feedback from the students is much more for students. It's much more easier not to give feedback at all in this e-learning. So this special attention should be focused there because of that. Thank you. The QA is one of the main issues in this topic. However, I want to share some insights from the analysis we have done as a students from Vilnius University at the end of 2018. We made an analysis of the stage of e-learning in Lithuania. We conducted a large survey of the students in Lithuania, and also made analysis of few universities in Lithuania, also as abroad, and made some recommendations on how e-learning should be, how work should be done on e-learning. I also provided you with the link. It is in Lithuania, sadly. However, I did try to use Google Translate, and surprisingly, Google Translate translates this really well. So if you have some time, you can check it out. Also, some of the examples and links are in English, so maybe you will find some useful information as well from the links. And so, next one, please. So this few considerations from my part, and they are mainly oriented towards the students. Actually, I don't know how many of participants here are students, but I would assume since it's European Students' Union event, the majority, or at least half or 1/3, should be students. And I just wanted to stress some things that students should think about and students should do in regards to this e-learning. So there's four key aspects, in my opinion. What you have to think about is, first of all, formulating aim. What do we expect from this e-learning? What do we want it to be? What do we want it to provide to us, and how we want for it to enhance our learning? Because if you are at a stage where you don't have any e-learning courses at all, maybe a part of your aims should be to develop some e-learning courses. And on the other hand, if you already enrolled in full e-program or e-learning courses, maybe your aims are on improvement. And from those aims, then it branches to three, let's say, categories of actions that should be taken at teacher level, or the individual level, university level, and national level. I will not delve into our recommendations and what should be done at each level. However, I just will share some broad considerations of mine and from our analysis on what students should really take into consideration. So next slide, please. So in regards to formulating aim, as I mentioned, we need to be clear what do we want from this e-learning. We shouldn't want e-learning just for the sake of it. It does provide a lot of opportunities, a lot of new possibilities, and we should be very clear about what do we expect in regards to communication, provision of materials, assessment, feedback from the students, and also feedback from the teachers to students on how we perform. So we have to really take into consideration what do we expect from e-learning, and only after that act upon its quality and things like that. So next slide, please. Here I only provided the example of what we do in Vilnius University, because it's now for 4 years, but we are working on promoting e-learning in our university, as it is really our university is really at a very basic level with only few e-learning courses and several about 10 or more blended learning courses. So our aim in that regards is only to have at least some blended learning courses as a middle step towards moving to e-learning. So, and the sum of our objectives we developed is like a raising awareness of the teachers as well as students, because students need to be prepared for e-learning and for the challenges and possibilities of e-learning as well. And I will not go over all the objectives, but the important, if we would be talking about the quality assurance, one of our aims is to initiate the development of regulations on e-learning and blended learning. And this is not actually the case. We want to just initiate discussion, because there is a lack of discussion on what should be e-learning and how it should be quality assured. And also, as a last step, one of our objectives is to initiate formation of the commission, which would provide some help on developing blended learning courses as from methodological side of how to do certain things in e-learning course. Next slide. And this table I really like. I will not go also in the details because of the time limitations, but this model is really interesting, as it shows what technology could be used for. It could be used just only for substitution, like we are having now Zoom. We're just substituting a real live discussion sitting in auditorium with the Zoom. It could be used for augmentation, just with some functional improvements like this Mentimeter we had, the possibilities to separate questions according to the first question and things like that. So we should be really taking into account what we want to have in regards to usage of technology and on what level do we actually want to be. Next slide. And so one of the key messages from me, but we should encourage teachers, actually, even as the students, we should encourage teachers, because at the core of the development of these e-learning courses are teachers themselves. So especially at the beginning of the development of e-learning courses, what we have faced in our university, where teachers really lack experience to develop the courses and knowing what should we do in these courses. And it's really frightening, and I do understand, but having little experience is frightening. It's frightening for me as well. So actions we should and activities we should do as the students, I think we should just talk directly with the teachers. I remember one discussion when I had with one teacher from political science faculty, and we just were talking about e-learning, and I just said, okay, why don't you just do an e-learning, blended learning, not e-learning, blended learning course next year? And he said, you know what, I will do it. So, and he just did on the next year war studies, blended learning course. So it's really important just talking directly with teachers and encouraging them and showing your support for e-learning course and for the improvement of e-learning course. Also, this dissemination of good practices, advocating of the policies, well, it really depends on what do you do in your student representation, but the first step is really important. But because teachers, I do believe teachers like to be appreciated by the students for what they are doing, and they do really like to know what students want and what students would enjoy. So next slide, please. And some of my final considerations, I think I'm running out of time. So just final key messages and actual plan is needed for development of e-learning or for development of the quality of e-learning. At the beginning, it is a very difficult thing to do, and institutions, students, teachers, everyone have to invest a lot of time and a lot of energy into development of e-learning. And also, this is one of the drawbacks. I do believe that e-learning is not always possible in certain disciplines where laboratory works or practices are required. So physics, because you need to be present in laboratory and to work with the laser or things like that. In medicine, it is not always possible because you need to be with the patient, talking with the patient, analyzing it, and things like that. So e-learning is not a panacea. It is not always a solution, and in certain cases, it is not possible. Despite that, e-learning provides many opportunities which should be used efficiently and should not be forgotten. However, I do want to stress one final message from me. I do believe that communication, face-to-face communication, is really important. You know, as a student, I understood after 6 years of studying at university that real learning is happening 5 minutes before the lecture, because you know, before the lecture you have to bring in your homeworks and you're just talking with other students and discussing what have you done, what have I done, which one did correctly, what answers did you get, what answers did I get, and this is the real learning. And we have to, when we are moving to e-learning, we really have to think how to compensate this lack of real life chats, because the simple chats for the few minutes are the ones where you share your ideas, your opinions, and where you do really learn. Even those 5 minutes after lecture when you stay with the teacher and ask some few questions which you usually would not ask maybe in the e-learning course, because it's so difficult to turn on the microphone and you have to be in the center of attention. You cannot just stay as the last one after the lecture and ask some teacher some questions. So we have a lot of opportunities on e-learning and we have to use them wisely. And I think the most important consideration for quality assurance is keeping up communication, because we have to talk, we have to discuss, and the learning is happening. I think is happening after in the interaction between teacher and students between themselves and things like that. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ignas, for your insights in the student perspective on e-learning and the quality assurance of e-learning. So now, after we got the presentation from Maria on the European ENCA perspective and Ignas' more student perspective, we move on to the third expert presentation, which is given by George Ubaks from the European Associations for Distance Teaching Universities and John Roswell from the Open University. And they will bring in the perspective of the teacher side and the institutional side. And they will elaborate also a little bit more on the e-excellence framework. So I will give the floor to them now.
Sure. We agreed, John and I, that John will give the presentation now, and I will have at the end also a closing word after his presentation.
Okay.
Okay, that's great. I'll carry on then. I'm John Roswell. Let's go straight on to the next slide. I'm going to talk through e-excellence particularly, but I think it's worth just thinking more generally about what we mean by quality in higher education. And I picked up 3 different aspects. One of them is about accreditation and standards, and that really reflects what Maria was talking earlier about the ESG. Another is about the reputation of the university. So universities want to appear good because that means they attract good students, and that means they produce good graduates at the end of it. But a more important one, to my mind, is about quality enhancement. It's about allowing teachers who generally do want to teach and do a good job of it to do better over time, and particularly to allow a different institution to fit to their different students. So students do vary between institutions. So really that should be the focus of enhancement. Let's go on to the next slide, and I'll just introduce e-excellence. This is a project that's been running for about 10 years now. It has a series of resources on the website there. which you can look at, including a manual which has some nice background information which you might find useful. And it's been updated regularly, so we're on to 3rd edition, I think, at the moment. And it provides a good framework for thinking about quality in online education, e-learning, and blended learning altogether. So I will go to the next slide and explain what I mean by a benchmarking approach, which is the characteristic of e-excellence. And a benchmark is really a statement of good practice. It's what good e-learning looks like at a particular institution. But that can vary for different institutions. So when it comes to doing an assessment, which I'll talk a bit more about, it's about collecting evidence, and that can be specific to every university. If you do that systematically, you can collect together what's where your strengths are and where the weaknesses are for any particular university. And that allows you to look back and think, where do I need to improve? Where do we need to do better? And that is what should produce a roadmap for actions, and that over time will lead to enhancement overall. And that's the thrust of e-excellence. It's all about enhancing the quality. So next slide. You can see that there are quite a number of benchmarks. We have about 35 altogether. They're grouped into a number of important topic areas. And these take a very, very broad view on the things that can contribute to quality. So the course materials is only one bit of it, and it's all about surrounding support, student support very clearly, but also staff support, and even the strategic management of the university, which sets strategy and supports the e-learning. So these are very important characteristics. How that's put into process, next slide, is through a review, and it starts by a self-assessment within the institution. So an internal team is formed which must have a range of stakeholders, teachers, students, but also management and support staff. And they discussed amongst themselves, and a lot of value comes out of that discussion on its own, and work out what evidence they can put against the different benchmarks. Once they've done that, it's time to bring in the external experts from e-excellence who conduct a review and a discussion, usually over a couple of days, either face-to-face or online, as a result of which the institution can go away and produce their roadmap for improvement, and the reviewers write a report. And if everyone's happy, that leads to recognition in the label. And next slide. This shows you one benchmark, and I've just picked one which actually chimes with what people were saying earlier, which is about social media and academic community. You might want to put yourself in the point of view of a reviewer. What sort of evidence would you look for that would meet a benchmark like that? So please do use the Mentimeter to make some suggestions. Maybe we can pick them up later. That's a typical benchmark. On the next slide, we've got some more detailed indicators which come out of our manual. So these give some examples of the sorts of things that you might look for as a reviewer. But remember that this can vary from different institution to different institutions. So institutions are allowed to put different sorts of evidence. They don't have to meet exactly this. Next slide. And it's worth saying that we've been able, because we've been doing this over a period of time in a lot of different institutions, to look back and see where institutions are saying the issues arise. Where are they going to take action? And some of them, I think, actually do correspond to things we've already heard. Online academic communities, that sense of academic community is really important to a learner. And institutions recognise that, and they will be planning lots of actions about that. Interactivity, a range of e-learning tools that can support the range of different subjects that you might want to teach, has always been an issue. But technology is changing. I suspect that one should be going down. There's lots of tools out there at the moment. Staff workload often comes up when you talk to people because it is hard work moving online. And so that is an issue that comes up quite regularly. Okay, next slide then, please. very briefly, there is also a MOOC version of eExcellence, so I won't talk any more detail about that. Let's go on again. George, do you want to step in at this point and say anything about this, or shall I plow on?
Yeah, I'm going to say something about this. Yeah. Okay, I will start my video. Hi there. Good afternoon. Yeah, so I've been working closely with John and his colleague Karen and many other contributing experts from within our membership on quality assurance and online education for the past decade. And this especially has to do with the latest innovations in education, often have to do with getting online, having a part online in the blended mode. And online is adding to education, for blended education, especially enhancement of the quality. For continuing education, it makes it more flexible and scalable. And for open education, of course, it has to be online. So the demand for quality in online education is important, as it is also the basis of innovating further education. In that respect, universities, many of our members of EDTU, the network of universities working with online open and flexible education all over Europe, is that they are taking a lot of initiatives in this respect and leading innovation education by using online new modes of teaching. And therefore, we also have been looking for the connection with the quality assurance agencies, have developed our own instrument, eExcellence, as was just presented by John. And also with ENQA, we have been working together on the working group of ENQA on quality and online education. We did also a webinar with them, but most importantly was the EDTU ENQA peer learning activity that we organized in 2017, where we brought all these stakeholders together, also policymakers next to QA agencies and the universities, to together explore how we can give room and space and support for further innovating education by using new modes of teaching and online education. The principle behind this was in the end that we have to leverage also the expertise within the national quality assurance agencies to understand where innovation in online education is coming from, where it's going, so to have indicators for that as well. But also to understand that at this moment, where not all universities are working with online education, but if so, that there is a dialogue between the quality agencies and the university. That is important, because you can't have all innovations in the use by online education captured by criteria indicators. It's mostly an alternative for physical mode of teaching, which can be creative, different, innovative. So a dialogue is very important to understand each other at the QA agency level and the university level. What else we've been doing is working closely together with ICDE and UNESCO. You see here the last slide. EDTU is the European regional focal point for ICDE, UNESCO for QA and online education. That means that we have done, in this respect, SWOT analysis of how online education is developing in Europe and how QA is related to that. This in a global platform of ICDE, it's the International Council for Distance Education. And we continue to do this this year, and we make a comparative analysis with the other global players from other continents. Important is also that we are discussing the use of eExcellence now, which was presented by John, also at a global level. In Europe, we have more than 50 universities have used eExcellence as a reference tool and guidance to further improve their online education performance. And we also now want to bring this, including good practices from Europe, also at to the global level. Yeah, I think that's what I would wanted to add to the presentation from John on eExcellence, and we hope that we continue our work and having more and more universities working with eExcellence, and as was told, also students are involved in the process of assessing the quality in online education in the on-site reviews. So if you have questions for me or John at this moment, I think that's time for that now. Thanks.
Yes, we will do the questions in the panel discussion after. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Can I give the floor back to you, John, or?
I think I'll stop there because otherwise I'll take up too much time. So.
Okay, then I'll just quickly go through the rest of the slides, but we will also send everything afterwards to all the participants so they can have a look at the rest.
Yeah, I think I can already start with the panel discussion, with the opening of the panel discussion. So first of all, thank you so much for all of your input that you already gave to us and the participants. Now a short information for the participants. In case you haven't registered or haven't logged in on mentimeter.com, you can use the code that was posted in the chat to log in there and also post questions that you have towards our experts to be answered by them in there. So they will pop up on the screen and I can take them into account in the panel discussion. So I would like to start with one first question that I noted while listening to you, and that's the diversity of the student population. So in your talks, I also heard that the student population within e-learning, I'm not talking about this emergency situation right now, but in general, the diversity of the student population is higher within e-learning. And I would like to ask you, Maria, which kind of implications this has on quality assurance and quality of learning in general.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I think it's very much related, well, it's very much related to everything. But I think the most important thing to do first is that institutions both acknowledge that diversity and understand it. So it's not enough to say, we understand there is a lot of diversity, but the institutions really need to analyze what profiles there are, and then accordingly develop their, for example, interactive tools, or even that might have an impact on the pedagogical approach that is selected. So I think it really has an overall impact, and that would be too many details, and I'm not an expert from an institution, but really the key is know what is the diversity and therefore also understand the different needs.
Thank you very much, Maria, on this insight. I would like to reflect also from the other perspective of students on this question. So I would like to give the floor to Ignas to say a little bit what you learned from your student peers about how e-learning can benefit a broad diversity or diverse student population.
Well, just as I said, so in my institution, we are not so advanced in e-learning as in general, but what I believe that the diverse student population have effect, either it's a traditional learning, and also it is also the same as in e-learning, but e-learning just allows to have this more diverse population of students. So I don't have very much to add than what Maria has said, because you really need to look at how your students are learning. Maybe especially if it's students from, let's say, different cultural backgrounds, there are certain ways learning done in certain parts of the world. So maybe you have to account for that. There are certain amount of information the students expect from the teacher or expect from administration, so you also have to account to that. But I think the main idea that it is the same as in traditional learning, but only with the online tools.
Thank you very much. I would like to follow up on the first question that was raised that you can see on the screen. So it's about the emergency situation right now, how universities and higher education institutions are changing to e-learning in this situation right now. So from your perspective, John, how do you think can, even in this emergency situation with not enough time to really properly implement e-learning, can universities and higher education institutions increase the quality of these offerings?
Well, I think one thing that was clear in the sort of first couple of weeks was actually there was a lot of good practice being shared on Twitter and on various websites and so on. So I think a lot of universities did step behind and offered, you know, quick suggestions that would help people do that very quick pivot from teaching in the lecture hall one week to teaching online the next week. So I think there was a lot of very good, simple craft advice out there that really aimed at bridging this sort of emergency period. I think beyond that, there's a wealth of educational research on distance learning and on online learning, kind of in the larger sense, which is out there anyway. What's missing actually is people evaluating these sort of intermediate stages, and it was very clear, I think, on that small sample that we took, that students weren't very satisfied with the emergency courses that were going on at the moment. So that little survey just at the beginning of this session seemed to make quite a big difference between the courses that were designed as e-learning and the emergency one. Right, I think that's all I want to say.
Thank you very much. Maybe following up on the first initial short survey, which also goes hand in hand with this next question that's now on the screen, is which kind of best practices can you share about how to engage students, also how to engage staff and teachers, and facilitate that kind of academic community engagement and exchange between the different stakeholders? Maybe we first ask Ignace from a student perspective, how do you think this could be facilitated in best practices, or have you heard or experienced some best practices?
Well, it is a very difficult question, and I do not have a concrete answer to that. Of course, there is always, let's say, most traditional in e-learning way to have these live conferences like we have here, but I don't think they are that very efficient, because you know, the participants are muting themselves, turning off the cameras, and this is due to natural reasons. And I think teacher needs to be a really need to be able to really ask the students and be able to draw them out, to provide them with the courage and to speak up. So this is very difficult. I don't have a very good answer, because maybe some surveys could be possible with short comments after a certain period, just okay, what's your thoughts on this matter? But it's not a live discussion, but it's a means to collect the feedback, but it's very difficult, I think.
Thank you very much. So it doesn't seem like there's a one-size-fits-all solution, but maybe George, you can, from your perspective of experience, I guess, a lot of different approaches, can you please share some best practices or ideas you have encountered?
Yeah, to engage students and academics in a virtual environment. Well, there are different ways. First of all, you have synchronous and asynchronous ways of doing that, so that they are live meeting or at different times. And then there's the opportunity, of course, to have students prepare something and sharing that more in a academic discussion with the others. What I think is interesting, and we have just launched a dedicated website on this, is about virtual mobility, the possibility of meeting students from other universities by using online education, which means that you have a team of international students online, in which you have together a task, and then you can reflect on the topic, for example, sustainability, from different perspectives, from different countries and different students. And if you are leading such a group in an online environment, it also gives you some skills of well, management of online teams. Huh? How can you keep them motivated? How can you make sure that everybody delivers on time and so on? So these are new skills that I think is important also that you can learn from these virtual mobility formats that you can use. Yeah, so there is a lot to explore. It's on EADTU virtual mobility website. You can find all formats on this.
Thank you very much. I would like, it's also in line with these kind of questions that I just asked to you, which is also about how to make e-learning interesting, that we are avoiding situations in which students are sitting more passively behind the computers and just like taking up things rather than engaging themselves. So maybe Maria, I can ask that question to you. Which kind of opportunities do you see within e-learning to make like an interactive, engaging environment for students?
Thank you, Liv. I'm definitely not a pedagogical expert nor an e-learning expert directly, so it's not an easy question to answer. But I think it requires a real rethinking of how teaching is done. So I think we have to really break out of how can we make a lecture plus questions and answers work online and move to a totally different mindset to create new methodologies so that it will be facilitated through a number of different tools, you know, starting even with a simple thing like Mentimeter, you know, or things that will trigger a student response constantly, or at least semi-constantly. So I think it will take a comprehensive look at the pedagogical model, really. But I'm afraid I really don't know. I would be interested to see a good e-learning program or experience one myself, so as to learn more.
Thank you very much.
Can I jump in there and offer something?
Yeah, you can step in.
Which is that the same thing's been faced by distance teaching for many years. And it's all about switching around so that the student becomes an active learner, so they really are taking control of their learning and providing them with rich resources and so on that they can find out. So there is actually a history of moving away from traditional lecture transmission model of teaching, which predates online even, and certainly predates the COVID thing. So there are lots of ideas about.
Seems like we have lost John's connection right now. Maybe if you agree, George, can I pass on the word to finish John's thoughts from your perspective?
Well, I was looking for the links at the same time. So I didn't know actually where he finished.
Okay, but John is back. Perfect.
Okay.
John, we lost you. So you.
Oh, did you?
We couldn't hear.
Oh, I can't remember what I said and what I didn't say. So just let's move on.
Okay. But I think that's also a question to the both of you. So there's a question from our participants about how to create a social study environment. So which kind of, or which advantages do we get from the technology that's available that we can use to engage students and also facilitate their communication between each other, but also with their teachers and vice versa?
Would you like me to?
Yeah, sure.
To start. So,
Or maybe we switch to George because we are encountering again some connectivity problems. Sorry.
Yeah, the social aspect. Well, like Maria is saying, we should not copy what is happening on campus to online, because online gives you new opportunities, and with other pedagogical models you can do so much more. That's we always also not saying you should put everything online. Some things can be better done face to face, but where you can enhance the quality of education with online, you can do that. And I think by involving other groups or other people from different disciplines by a click and bringing them into a similar meeting room, or by polls or any other instruments that you can use, you can add elements, for which one is, of course, it could be the social element, but it could also be the different perspectives from different fields. What an interesting example which just comes to my mind now is that Leiden University had a very strong group, very bright youngsters who needed to have an additional challenge. And what they did, they had a MOOC, and a MOOC on the topic. That means that a lot of students from outside the university can be identified who are interested and very good on the topic. So they invited Asian students, which they would never have known about, but by this MOOC, this online course, they were known to Leiden University, brought into the group of the Leiden students to challenge the brightest students of Leiden even more by involving those Asian students for that purpose. So it broadens the outreach of the university in that sense as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, and also was raised by one of the participants. So which type of student individuals can thrive in e-learning? So maybe I would like to ask that question to Ignaz as a student representative. So which people of the student population do you think would benefit the most from e-learning, or would even be more open in these environments?
Well, what I think is that all students should benefit from e-learning, not only a specific group of students. But of course, we do have the students which are more, those keep more to themselves and do not like to be in the presence of other people and things like that. But I wouldn't have let's say a picture of particular student which would thrive in e-learning. I think e-learning should be designed in a way which would accommodate all the students with from a different backgrounds as well as the traditional teaching. So this I would not suggest that there is a specific picture. What I can say, but the students could face problems in e-learning, especially because student as any physical system. I'm a physicist, but by the way, so in any physical system, try to be in the lowest possible energy state. So the students will also try to be in the lowest possible energy state. And it doesn't matter whether it's e-learning or face-to-face learning. So in e-learning, there are more possibilities to be in this lower energy state without actively participating. So this a bit relates to another question on how to make students active, and you really need to develop some methods, maybe some progress. You have a progress bar, you have some group work, so the students are responsible to other students, or some badges or things like that. So those students who tend to fall to lowest possible energy state, they will definitely fall to the state in e-learning.
Thank you very much, Ignaz, from your perspective. As we are running a little bit short on time, I would like to ask the last question to Maria, and it is from like the broader European perspective. What do you think universities and higher education institutions will learn from this COVID-19 crisis for the future of e-learning and the quality of e-learning?
Right, I think they will learn that both it's easier than they thought, and also that it's much more difficult than they thought. So I think that's a very good thing, because it has surely brought the e-learning as an option in front of the eyes of everybody. Before it was possible to hide from it and say, well, no, it's not really for us. And now that you've had to do it, you have to also face that as an option. So I think that's the big benefit that we can gain from this situation. And I thought I had it in my slide. I had it actually in another webinar last week. Of course, we have quality concerns, because we have to be careful and not let this thing slip. so that everything that has been provided as an emergency measure will just stay. That's unlikely, of course, but we have to be careful about the quality. But I still see, while aware of the risks of quality, I think this is more of an opportunity, and we should take advantage of this possibility.
Thank you, Maria. I think these were very nice words to wrap up this webinar that's running short on time. So I would like to take the last words to sum up a little bit what you as experts shared with us today. So one of the main takeaways from my side is that learning comes first and then the technology. So technology provides the tools. So e-learning in itself is not a learning, but it's a way of learning. And it opens new opportunities for different kinds of students. Almost, or as Ignas pointed out in one of his last comments, it should benefit all students. So there are different approaches also in e-learning that can benefit different student populations. Then what I also learned, or what I'm taking away from this meeting, is that there's a differentiation between the emergency situation and how universities are currently adapting their programs to e-learning and like long-term planned e-learn programs and courses. So they are two different things, and also right now should be regarded in that way of their quality and differently evaluated. Then also one topic that already was very highly discussed in the last meeting on e-assessment is communications. So also within the quality, communication between all different stakeholders is key to provide quality enhancement practices for the future and give the opportunity for exchange and fostering the quality. So with these last words, I would like to let you know that we are having a next webinar, the last one of the series, which is on recognition of learning. So kind of the last step also in this progress. So how to get courses or programs recognized for your academic achievements, but also in the sense of lifelong learning. And this webinar will take place on the 9th of June at the same time as today. So we would like to welcome you all back there again. And with that, I would like to give a big thank to all of the experts that were willing to join us and share their insights. We know your time is precious also in this current situation. I guess you're quite busy. So thank you even more for joining us and supporting us with this webinar project. And also thank you very much for all the participants that you were joining and your questions and your comments on quality of e-learning. It was a very interesting webinar. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.